Greetings, you happily miserable accursed. It's time for your weekly dose of everything beautiful and horrible in the world of politics. And joining Scott, Reid, and I as guest panelists this week on Curse of Politics, it's Jordan Leichnitz. Jordan has been on the Herle Birdie a couple of times now, and you know what she is, Scott?
What is she?
She's an NDPer.
She is a New Democrat. She is not like me. I mean, not a flexible, pragmatic New Democrat, but yeah, some credentials.
Jordan's worked in senior roles for the New Democratic Party, including Deputy Chief of Staff. She's currently Canada Program Manager for the Friedrich Ebert Stiff Tongue Office in Washington. Say hello to Klink and Schultz for me, would you?
Always.
All right, today on the pod, we're going to cover Chrystia Freeland's speech at the Empire Club last week outlining the government's approach to fight inflation. Warning, if you don't understand or agree with it, you might be economically illiterate. We'll talk about the Liberal NDP deal. The NDP had good ideas, but the Liberals are in charge, so don't call it a coalition, says Freeland. How long will this deal last? Relatedly, our cursed clipping this week is Sean Telebert's piece in The Star last Sunday about Justin Trudeau's so far inert third term. And as he always does, Gordon Pinsent will ring in our Hey Yous to close out the show. Hey, Jordan, welcome to the pod.
Thank you for having me.
Hey.
Scott, you're going to be on your best behavior.
I'm absolutely.
We have a guest.
You finally captured a New Democrat. You can't scare me off now.
Exactly.
No, we're lucky. We landed one.
So you guys, I do everything deliberately. Everything I do is entirely deliberate. And for that reason, first of all, I'm wearing my Saskatchewan Roughriders shirt today because the boys are 2-0 and the defense looks monstrous.
Looks good.
Monstrous. Yeah. Okay, second thing is I am drinking coffee out of my Lyndon Johnson mug.
Oh, all the way with LBJ.
Because the fucking Texas Republicans voted that, among other crazy things, they want to repeal the 1965 Voting Rights Act. That's where we're at in Texas politics now. They want to repeal Lyndon Johnson's 1965 Voting Rights Act. My God. Speaking of American politics, Scott, you've been paying a little bit of attention to that January 6th thing going on down in Washington, haven't you?
I have. And I know that people go out to American politics and blah, blah, blah. And everyone talks.
What does he know and about it and all that stuff?
Right. Well, in addition to being a political observer, I'm a Crown prosecutor. And so therefore I have lots of insight. No, I just think it's fascinating. I think it's fascinating for this reason. And I'd be interested to hear what you guys think. I one hard question. If you're Merrick Garland, you're the AG of the United States of America. You look at what's been presented so far, which is damning and startling when you watch it just exposed in full sunlight. And you have to conclude, don't you, that there's been criminal acts. But then you have to ask yourself, can I afford in the current political climate to charge the former president of the United States, knowing that that will be an incendiary event, knowing that it will be used then as evidence that we're trying to preemptively take him out of the presidential sweepstakes for the coming general election, presidential election in the United States. And I think you end up in a world where inexplicably that goddamn son of a bitch, Trump, they're going to end up not charging him. He will end up being above the law because to charge him would be to even play greater matches with the Democratic institutions.
You can't shimmy on these principles. Jordan, I'm very interested in your point of view, but I just have to say, I think the basic principle that either at the end of 8 years or when you lose, you leave is the most important principle of American governance. And they can't shimmy on that.
But do they charge him? Do they charge him with criminal misconduct?
I think they should, but I don't think they will for the exact reason that you outlined, Scott. It's a powder keg over there right now, and this would just add huge ammunition. And frankly, I think the fabric of those institutions in the U.S. is so frayed right now, I don't think they could take it.
I think you got to beat Trump at the ballot box decisively, right? Which, you would have thought last time seemed decisive, but obviously it wasn't. But if you use judicial means to say we're gonna sanction this guy, I think it's gonna blow that powder keg right up to the sky. You talk about 1965 voting registration, Voting Rights Act. America's in a rush to go backwards.
As the U.S. goes into this end state fight over minority rights, not minority rights, over minority rule, in which they've got an increasingly small number of people controlling the governing apparatus. And you've got this essentially backlash among largely white people about what's going on in the United States. This business about not accepting election results is not going to stop with Trump.
That's right.
We're in the beginning stages of a 20, 30, 40 year fight for the soul of the United States. It's not going to end in 1 year. And if they just have to hold firm to the core principles of their governance, it seems to me. If Trump's allowed to, if they have evidence, and they do, and he's just allowed to go scot-free, then all bets are off going forward, I think. And it's not just him. They've got to go after the people in the states, in the individual states that were rigging these, yes, they do.
Okay. You know what?
About
but Jordan is an international expert. So maybe Jordan, tell us what the hell.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're not wrong. Like they need to stick to these principles, but I think the political calculus is going to be different. That you would need to have such a strong institutional follow through on these things and such a clear vision from the presidency about where you're going to land that thing. I'm not sure that that's there. And they got the midterms coming up to worry about, right? So that's going to be foremost in their minds. And I worry mostly about what the resonance of this is going to be up here, because the occupation has left, but not really, right? Yeah.
Well, I do think there's a connection, right? In the sense that,
but it's a smaller cohort up here.
Of course,
it is, but it's equally toxic, right? And I think that it's, we're fooling ourselves if we think that it's gone. Really, like what began in January is just the start, and we're seeing it unfold through the conservative leadership, and we're going to continue to see it unfold here. Potentially in some pretty unsavory ways.
Here's a specific connection that I would make, and it folds into where I think you want to talk about both Freeland and the Chantal Hébert article and that sort of stuff, David. And that's, I think first of all, you've got more courage than I have, David. And I think you're right. It sounds damn peculiar. If I'm saying fundamentally, the best way to defend the institutions that protect us all is to not use those institutions to enforce the law, the rule of law. That sounds like a damn strange argument, but I'm so scared about the fragility of those institutions that I worry that if they do charge Trump, it'll blow things up and those institutions will come under even more pounding attack. And I worry about their capacity to withstand that. So set all that aside, because your point is a principled one, and it just takes more political courage than I guess I have. But the fundamental thing is, Jesus Christ, the other side has got to mount a more potent response, right? They have to be more compelling, more attractive. And it isn't just lecturing people and saying, this is why you're dumb and you're wrong and why the shit you read on Facebook is incorrect and you're stupid for thinking it. Like, you can't just yell deplorables at people. They've got to have a more compelling, right, set of leaders. They got to have a more compelling argument, a more compelling set of policies. They've got to have a more compelling story that people go, well, I'm going to nod my head to that rather than nod my head to the shit that these people are spewing. And that is very much like us. And, I look at the response. We're watching the threat assemble. We're watching the storm gather with this conservative leadership and the mounting success that is Pierre Poilievre. And I see the federal government providing what I think is a tepid response, both in terms of responding specifically to Poilievre, but responding broadly to the policy challenges that, like extreme solutions take root when convention fails. And the government seems to be content with the most conventional of conventional approaches. So, like my number one reaction is, fuck, get better, other side.
Well, we'll get to that in a second, and I'm interested to hear from Jordan because she supports this government through a confidence and supply agreement. So
for 3 years.
For 3 years.
It's contract, right?
On that.
This is like a 4-album record deal, right? Like you're signed up.
June 21st is the summer solstice, which feels to me like exactly the right choice to celebrate the diverse cultures of National Indigenous Peoples Day in this country. Obviously, it is a good thing that there's a day devoted to this, and it's good that it's the longest day of the year. But let's be honest, one day doesn't really cut it, does it? Given this country's history, reconciliation needs to be an everyday pursuit, animated by action. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, recognizes this truth. They've been working to progress the path of reconciliation for some years now in a deeply meaningful way. TELUS understands that each Indigenous community has unique needs, which is why they're seeking ongoing feedback from Indigenous community members. A couple of months ago, they launched their Indigenous Advisory Council, IRAP, the direct result of consultations between TELUS and Indigenous peoples, and a way to keep Indigenous experience included in their work. Right now, that council has 4 advisors. By 2023, the IRAP will include 6 additional advisory council members. The goal here is to learn from Indigenous voices and experts in their fields with lived experience in order to advance the work of TELUS's Indigenous Reconciliation Action Plan. The plan has 4 main pillars: connectivity, to collaborate with Indigenous governments and organizations to get communities connected to advanced broadband; enabling social outcomes, to create and expand programs that go beyond connectivity and help communities achieve long-term prosperity and success; cultural responsiveness and relationships, to listen, learn, and understand how TELUS can meet the unique needs and ensure culturally responsive customer experiences for Indigenous customers; and economic reconciliation, to support sustainable economic participation and growth for Indigenous peoples through meaningful involvement in TELUS's business. As I said off the top, Hurly-Burleyites, a day to celebrate Indigenous cultures and contributions is an excellent thing. But TELUS is also committed to the 364 other days where the real work of reconciliation needs to happen. So Chrystia Freeland responded to my "Hey You," and I'm sure there's a direct correlation, and she gave a speech last week about inflation and the economy at the Empire Club in Toronto. And what she did is she said, "We have nothing new for you, but a lot of things that we had already planned to do for the last couple of years turn out to be perfect for this circumstance. So we don't need to do anything new because we've got all these things that are going to help you with your cost of living." So if that was intended to be the big sort of stake in the ground about here's our position on how we're managing inflation and how we're going to help get you through this cost of living crisis, Jordan, how'd that go for her?
Oh, I hated it. I thought it was like the worst of all worlds, right? You know, you've got her out there announcing things that are old. These are just re-announcements. There's nothing new. There was no real sense of urgency that was connected to what people are actually feeling in their lives as they go to the pump and gas is over $2 and, you know, your grocery bill is suddenly 20% higher. Like there was no sense of connection with that. As for the measures themselves, well, you know, there's nothing new, but of course, you know, they managed to tally up the numbers to make the spending seem huge, which of course reinforces the notion that the feds are spending too much right now. I thought strategically it was just a complete mess. And and if this is the best that they have, then they're in real serious trouble.
I thought it was maybe the single most high profile, astonishing failure at an important moment that we've seen in the last many years. Like at a moment where something needed to be said and done of real significance, where you say, we get it and we're doing something about it. We recognize the challenge that people feel and we're responding to it, and here's how. I thought that it was just the worst possible response. And there's obvious reasons that everybody else has said, right? Which is that, you know, you're packaging up, you know, last year's Christmas gifts and saying, hey, turns out these actually also work for Easter. Okay, great. That's obviously beyond tepid. But in addition to that, there are things there that really worry me politically, right? A, all the lack of urgency that's signaled. B, the political tone that it conveys, which I think is so alarming, because you've got this freight train of right answers, wrong answers, any fucking answer, but I'm coming down the tracks, says Poilievre, with answers. And for a government to say, let me explain to you why what we're doing is already what you need. And it's the worst possible narrative. And above all else, it's obviously unsustainable. So we know that this will change. Like there are rules of political gravity. And one of them is that there will be relieving measures. The government will take new measures and they will say, all right, we can no longer just say to people, grin and bear it. We've got a childcare deal coming in Manitoba. They're going to do, some kind of relief.
Hold on. What are they going to do? Because let's be fair about this, which is what the fuck is there to do? Like, I'm going to just assert this.
Right.
That the size of the government deficit versus, say, a balanced budget, if you were to have a balanced budget, is contributing negligibly to inflation in Canada right now. Of all the drivers of inflation, the difference between a balanced budget and the current deficit is a negligible factor. So if they were to cut spending unreasonably, they would not, in my view, in any significant way affect inflation in Canada. So that's a dumb thing to do. You can't compensate people for inflation. That would be CERB on steroids if you were to try to actually compensate people for the increase in their cost of living. So what genuinely are you supposed to do other than fucking lose the election when inflation happens?
Yeah, well, I think they're being offered some suggestions, certainly from the New Democrat quarters, that they would be smart to take a look at. Like, they need to make a decision about who the winners are going to be out of the COVID recovery, right? And right now, the way it's going, the winner is going to be corporate Canada, because we're seeing now corporate profits are growing. They're growing faster than the pace of inflation. Wages are not, right? Wages are growing at half the rate of inflation. So as it works out right now, regular people and workers are the ones who are falling behind. We know that there is obviously extra money in the system, and a lot of that's coalescing right now in form of corporate profits that are being used for buybacks and so on, right? So this is not even money that's being reinvested. I think it's a smart moment to look at some of the proposals like an excess profit tax, get that money out, get it recirculating to those who are living most pressed on the margins. I don't think we're going to see a really broad-based CERB type assistance again for the exact reasons that you state. But there are people who are really on the edge, right? And who are going to fall off it unless they're given some assistance. And we really have the means to scoop the money out of the places where it shouldn't be and put it back into their hands. But the Liberals are going to need to stretch a little bit if they want to take that advice.
But you would agree, Jordan, I think, that that may be where the need is, but the political pressure on inflation doesn't come from the marginalized who are going to fall off the edge. It comes from the middle-class people who are bitter about the fact that the price of gas is crowding out other things in their spending life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that more than anything, people are also looking at who is a winner and a loser here. So there's also a story to be told about values, right? And this is a story that the government is not telling right now. And if the Liberals don't start to tell a story quickly, then they are going to lose that opportunity as of September 10th, because Pierre Poilievre is going to be in there telling a real compelling one. So they need to make a decision about who is going to come out on top. And I think that the problem is, and we saw it this week with Freeland's speech, is that cool and detached is not the tone. That's not how people are feeling. And so they need a villain, they need a hero, and they need to make sure that it's Canadians that are at the center of the story and not monetary policy, which, despite the famous quote, is actually really what is at the center of a lot of the remarks right now. And that's just not enough.
Did you hear the empathy from her, Scott? Did you hear the Bill Clinton, I feel your pain?
No. And I'm certain that if there are people listening who work for her, they're going to send me paragraphs in the speech and say, see, it's there. But it's not a message that was surfaced. It's not a message that that came through. I mean, the most direct statements that got quoted of that sort, where there's kind of like, let me just talk straight to you and I want you to be heard, was her addressing Bay Street, saying, get off my ass about deficits. I'm actually holding the line on them. For all the reasons you said and others, I don't actually think that's a message that I would like. I just don't think that's where the political pressure, I don't think, to be blunt, that's where the substantive policy pressure is coming from. I think there are things that need to be done, and I think that they come with big prices.
People have 99 problems right now, and the federal deficit is not one of them.
Right. And so, the truth is, the government can't do much about the causes of this, right? Like, because it is something that's bigger than you can put your arms around as any national government. But you can do two things. One, you can mitigate some of the effects on people, mitigate some of the negative effects, or at least, for Christ's sake, be seen as though you are scrambling and utilizing every tool in the box to try to mitigate negative effects. And second, you could try to put in some policies, maybe they aren't that sexy, they don't get a lot of attention now, but that might help strengthen your capacity to come out of this faster and better, and with a little bit more widely held benefit. So, from my perspective, I mean, it's just staring us all in the face. And this comes with a huge political price. But you gotta deal with gas, okay? The price of gas is the fucking song that's playing on everyone's lips. And we've got...
Because it's advertised on every street corner.
And we had the CNS agreement. And I think a real potential source of tension on that is... if the government says after the U.S. is going to move later this week on excise tax on gas and lower it, if the government finally reverses itself and at some point, whether it's now or whether it's in the fall, finally knuckles under and says, okay, we're going to have a gas tax holiday, we're going to lower the excise tax. If they do something like that, to me, you got to take control of that now. And that's going to cause real pressures because that's obviously in contradiction and conflict with your climate plan. And that's going to cause real political fallout. That's very hard for Jagmeet Singh to rationalize. So where does that put you in terms of your parliamentary... Climate change.
But you can't. That's so pre-Ukraine war inflation. That is such an old idea, climate change. Man, we're past that now. We need lower gas prices.
Well, you know what? The truth of the matter is the only way to try to stay whole on this, first of all, you can't stay whole on it. You can't. These two things are in too much direct conflict. But
what you're saying is, and I agree with you 100%, you're saying that even if there's no smart things to do, that means you're going to end up doing a dumb thing. So what is the dumb thing you're going to do, right? And it's going to be gas. They are going to relieve the pricing. Yeah. So
are you have to be gas?
It does. I know how this movie ends. For the love of God, I've seen it.
But if they do nothing and they wait, then it's going to have to be gas because that's what the Tories are coming in hard at, right? But I think the point that we're all making to some degree or another is that the window for choice is closing, right?
Yeah.
And you get a moment, and that moment I think could have been this week, but that was for me anyways. That was a clear miss. They get a moment to tell the story about how they're going to make regular people in Canada. They're going to protect them. They're going to have their back. They're going to make sure that they're the winners coming out of this, and they missed that. So I think that unless they get smart really quickly on some of these suggestions and take some that maybe are a little unpalatable right now, they're going to be forced to take some that are very unpalatable down the road.
I think it's even tougher than that. I just want to have one more
Plus, you lose the initiative, right? You look like you were beaten into doing something for ordinary people, and you don't get the credit for it at the end of the day.
That's what's so terrible about that speech last week. Because if this is a story, the first chapter in the story was the hero saying, I will choose to be unheroic. I'm not coming to your aid. And then later, right? Later, when the neighbor says, well, I've actually decided to pull the fire extinguisher off the wall, right? You say, okay, well, I guess I'll see if I have, a bucket of sand. And then people go, well, you know what? We don't really think your heart's in throwing sand on that fire. But I want to add one more thing. It's not just this will, I believe, absolutely in my bones that this will end in one of two ways. There will be mitigating and relieving measures, notwithstanding what the government has said. It is a political inevitability. And either you can say now, look, gas is the issue. And so we are going to, it's a issue anyway, it's a frontline issue. And we are going to provide this kind of excise tax holiday. We will keep municipalities whole from the public treasury, but we're going to lower that for people so that the burden is lifted on them. We're going to do that under the following conditions and either for an arbitrary amount of time to be reviewed or until some formula, like inflation hits this or whatever, so that you're able to say to people, look, I'm not doing this permanently. I'm not abandoning my climate agenda, but I have to take temporary relief because people feel it that badly. Or if they don't do that, this is what will happen. And it's the thing you mentioned, David, which is even worse and way dumber and will prolong the agony. And that is they will end up saying, all right, well, we don't want to signal that we're going to do something that goes in direct contradiction to our climate agenda. Therefore, we will just start to send checks to people. And that will actually contribute to inflation. And then, of course, what's going to happen is they also have to do public sector wage negotiations. That's going to happen. People are going to start coming to them. Big unions are going to come to them, public sector unions, and they're going to say, we want a 5%. We want an indexed increase. And, again, I look at the CNS agreement and I go, how does the government say we can't afford to unleash wage inflation on this or we'll extend this thing and make it worse? But also maintain the support of New Democrats. That's going to be another direct confrontation. Those two things. Do I act on gas tax, and how do I handle public sector wage negotiations? Those two things make this CNS deal with the NDP extraordinarily fragile and precarious going forward, I think. Plus, you got Pierre Poilievre with a fucking axe behind you.
Is there anything that leads you to believe, Jordan, that they are going to be tough on the public sector unions? Like, this government just writes checks, right? Like, they'll just...
No, I don't think that's on the horizon. No. And I mean, I think, Scott, the problem with what you're suggesting, I mean, obviously that's the universe of all the bad choices where you failed to choose earlier on and you're forced to make two bad decisions down the road. Is that there's still no story for them there, right? The Liberals there are still not, it's the worst of all worlds, right? They're choosing between these actions that are nonsensical, and they're not necessarily going to get them where they need to go from a narrative perspective either. So right now they still have a moment. They have a moment, very short window closing, where they can tell that story, and that's why I really keep. But it can't just be,
Jordan. Honestly, the story can't be. We're gonna beat up on the rich. I mean, that could be an element of it.
It has to be part of the story.
Okay, but yeah, gas tax is facing everybody, right? Yeah. Right in the wallet day by day. And I just think anything that pretends that isn't going to be a lever that needs to be pulled.
But Jordan, you're saying, I mean, you're trying to, it's interesting. And I'm not refuting this for you. I'm just exploring it with you, which is that you are suggesting that the government should say that rich people are the problem, and that we need to get money from rich people to give it to other people because they've accumulated too much in the recession and in COVID. Poilievre's line is that rich people are not the problem. He never talks about rich people. Government is the problem, right?
I would make a small refinement. I'm not saying specifically rich people, although, personally, I do think rich people are a bit of a problem. But I'm saying corporations who are doing exceedingly well during the pandemic, those who are making profits far over and above what they would be typically making.
Right.
That is a problem. And that is a space where...
Do you think it's a publicly identified problem?
I think it could be. I think it can be. I think that there's a ready narrative to tap into there if the government wants to. I think that Canadians believe that a lot of these large corporations are doing very well. People don't forget things like when Loblaws was price fixing, right? People don't, there's a sense, they don't forget that they cut that frontline bonus for.
At least it wasn't an essential product. It was only bread.
Right. It was just bread.
It was just, yeah.
And that, the pandemic was ongoing, those frontline cashiers who were one day our heroes and the next day got, their bonus cut back to minimum wage. People don't forget that, right? And that is a compelling story. That's a story about in whose interest is this government resolving the COVID crisis.
I agree with that.
Wait, you know what? I'm gonna interrupt this now because Chantel's piece is perfectly on point. So let me just fire Chantel's piece in here. Chantel feels even more strongly about this than we do. She got up last weekend and she pulled out a fucking baseball bat and took it to the government. And here's what she said in part. To look back on the first stretch of Justin Trudeau's third term is to be reminded that there is a reason why no prime minister has succeeded in securing a fourth consecutive election victory in more than a century. Based on the recent past, governments do not age well. On that score, think back to Stephen Harper's unimpressive third term or to the Liberal civil war that engulfed Jean Chrétien's last years in office. Just think back to that, Scott.
I don't know what you're talking about.
In the end, each of those governments ended up poisoning the well of its re-election for a fourth term. At this rate, Trudeau's tenure will be no exception. Since the Prime Minister's re-election last fall, the Liberal minority government has increasingly been running on empty. Instead of giving Trudeau's team a second wind, the striking of a cooperation agreement with the NDP last March seems to have given it a license for inertia. And who that had watched this government for the first 7 years did not think that was going to be the case? They only do things when they're up against a wall. They only make decisions when they're jammed up against a wall. So once the NDP took them away from the wall, they're on autopilot. Jordan, what do you think about Chantel's take on that?
I think she's partly right, but I don't think the NDP's taken them away from the wall. I think they've just moved it down a session, right? So listen, I mean, I think we all know governments can die of old age, and that's certainly a risk that the Liberals are facing right now. The last term, I think that if we look back, if we remember pre-pandemic, there was a time that coming out of 2019, like that Liberal government, there was no story, there was no raison d'etre there. COVID came and gave a mandate, gave a purpose, right? So like that's not going to happen again. So they need to quickly decide why they are in government now. I don't think that they have yet made that decision. I think that I will say, though, that the agreement with the NDP offers them a really important path and some potential answers on that question. I think that it is very true. There is the feeling that the Liberals are running on empty right now. They're getting sloppy. The basics we're seeing mistakes in the basics. I think we've all been there. Some of this is just a function of June, right? People are tired. These things tend to get magnified then, but they're at a really perilous moment and sloppiness is not where they need to be. So I think that if they're looking forward, Chantal makes some really good points here. The fragility of the agreement, I think, is something that they need to really keep in mind. This has not been a bad spring session for them. They've been able to do things as though they had a majority. The New Democrats have gotten something out of it too. We've seen there's been some wins, they've seen some progress, but the big items are yet to be done. And like Jagmeet Singh is not playing on this. So if there's not progress in the fall, I don't think this is something the Liberals can lean into for the long term.
So, Scott, just to tee you up, first of all, it took the finance minister quite a while to come out and say anything about inflation. And Trudeau seems really invisible on these issues. How checked out is he, I guess is my question, that he hasn't been engaging himself and that he hasn't been forcing Freeland out to carry this debate on behalf of the government. And just to pick up on where Jordan is, a fourth mandate, to win a fourth election, I know this, it's going to be a lesser of two evils election. It's not going to be 2015. You can't expect it to be 2015. It's going to be, they have to establish that Poilievre is unacceptable in order to get elected a fourth time. That's how that works. But you still need a positive message of some kind. You can't just be the other people are horrible. You have to give people something to believe in. What is this government going to give people to believe in?
Well, I just agree with everything so strongly. Look, the pact with the NDP provides things that really, really matter a lot. If you're sitting in Ottawa in the Prime Minister's office, having been there myself, right? It provides you with the capacity to achieve a legislative agenda, which might sound esoteric to people, but is really comforting when you're there. You can get your shit done. You get your bills passed, right? It also means that you don't get strung up at committee and like weird.
Herle doesn't get called to the committee.
Oh, I'm not kidding, right? Like literally, yeah. Herle doesn't get called before committee, so that you can you can avoid those kinds of unpredictable
but it was such fun.
handicaps. Yeah, I certainly recall it as such. But with that does come, to Chantal's point, right? Like, fear of death can cause panic and mistakes, or fear of death can cause focus and purpose. And it certainly feels like the Prime Minister is not dialed in. You say, well, how checked out is he? The answer, I have no idea, but the answer is too checked out. Whatever it is, it's too checked out. So now, because of Freeland's speech, they've left themselves with only one card to play. He has to give a speech. He has to reset the agenda because that was a squib. That was a wet fire.
He has to overrule it.
He has to come in. He has to overrule it. He has to. That's right. Now he has to play an ace because her jack didn't actually draw in the trick. And so, I really think, like the problems that she annotates. You've got a situation where Pierre Poilievre is coming with this head nodding populist, rage fueled but not ineffective message. It's going to find a lot of dry timber.
Backed by the credibility. I keep saying this because I think it's important out there in the street. He's backed by the credibility of having been right on inflation.
He was right on inflation.
Whether that was a broken clock right or whether that was substantively right, it doesn't matter. He was right and the government was wrong. This is a factor.
And it's a proof point on not only the most important issue in the country, but it's a proof point on these goddamn elites tell you that they always know better. Well, how can that be since I knew better than they did? But, I guess I'll wrap by just saying, from my perspective, the remedy to this is obvious. And it isn't just a negative, we'll wait and in 2 years we'll define him negatively. You have to, as you say, have a positive agenda. Part of overcoming this kind of populist message is to have something that makes people's heads nod even more. Go, actually, right, here's the 1, 2, 3 things I'm going to do for you, and get those people's heads nodding and have them nod harder. And I just see, like, whether it's, getting the passports filled, whether it's cleaning up the airports, whether it's just, from execution to architecture in terms of managing the agenda against, this populist uprising, much less the policy agenda and the politics of inflation, the government just seems like it is on autopilot and it's got to get off. And so Trudeau has to give a speech and he has to say, here's my new agenda. This is what it is. This is how we're taking action. And it's got to be smart and targeted and purposeful. And it can't wait as far as I'm concerned. Like, it literally can't wait.
Well, summer started today. Cue the old jokes about 2 weeks of lousy ski conditions. And they are old jokes. Summer can be an entirely different thing than it was just a generation ago. In British Columbia, last year's temperatures were at times the hottest on Earth. This year isn't expected to be as bad, but there will almost certainly be wildfires. CN, our sponsor, operates extensively out west and maintains an updated extreme weather fire plan. During really hot weather, it slows its trains, puts locomotives on both ends so that railroaders can monitor for any signs of fire, and on extreme days, assigns patrols to precede and follow trains. CN staffers do extra brush and vegetation clearing along the network, and sensors embedded in tracks monitor constantly for hot wheels or overheated bearings. Now, railroaders are not firefighters, but sometimes, for obvious reasons, they are first on the scene and can act as first responders until the professionals arrive. The railway maintains caches of firefighting equipment along its network. Water, bladders, sprayers, fire retardant foam, and hand tools are readily available, as are tanker trucks in some locations. And this year, CN staff deployed a massive firefighting behemoth nicknamed Poseidon. It's 66 feet long, equipped with 2 3,500-gallon water tanks, 3 pumps, hoses, and a diesel generator. Mechanics at CN's Walker Yard in Edmonton built Poseidon over the winter, guided by their own experiences in the field. It's now stationed in Kamloops, where it will roll the moment local firefighters in BC call for help. I'll repeat what I've said before. CN's commitment to safety is absolute. Pitching in to fight fires is the responsible thing to do. So Jordan, if this is how it is, the NDP can't carry this government around on their back for the next 2.5 years and pay the reputational price of being associated with this. I notice now already that every time Jagmeet Singh tries to offer a pointed criticism of the government, he gets pushback. It's public pushback and he gets media pushback.
Blows my mind. I think that there's no question that this government is mired in inertia that's dangerous, and the longer it goes on, the greater a risk it is to them. But they've got staring in front of them 2 immediate things that they can do, that they can just pull off the shelf that's going to help with this. And the first is on the positive offer. They can fulfill parts of the agreement. That's going to do 2 things. That's going to provide them immediately with some meaning, some content, some programs, some help for real people that's coming immediately, like that dental care program.
Which the parliamentary budget officer says is going to be twice as expensive as was forecast.
Well, hey, listen, having seen
estimates for an Ontario program,
first one, David,
did he cost the first? Well, okay,
that's right. So, that's on him, right? But listen, at the end of the day, that program is quite targeted, right? So if you dive down a little bit, that's income tested, that's really going to help the people. This is not going to contribute to the inflation problem, right? This is going to give people who haven't been to the dentist in a decade, some cavity filling. Okay. And that's something that's going to improve people's quality of life. That's going to help people's pocketbooks. And that's something, by the way, per the agreement, needs to happen this year. So take some of the stuff off the shelf, get going on it with some urgency, own it, have some energy around it. Right there, they've got in that agreement some positive policy stuff. They've also got in that agreement if they happen to go down that path of fulfilling it, that's going to strengthen the support of the New Democrats, which they are going to urgently need after September 10th in the House. Like, that need is only going to become greater. So if I were them, I'd be spending the summer doing that. But the other thing that's on the table that they haven't done is, like, why aren't they out there defining Polyev? Like, why are they waiting?
Scott's advising them not to do that. Scott's been advising them to wait.
Wow. I think it is so
You're killing me, Herle. I've become the crazy dude that lives behind the liquor store. I yell at everybody that goes by. Get on, Polyev! Do something! For the love of fuck! Buy me a bottle of rye! These are the things I say all day, every day.
Yeah. But like now, I mean, listen, like this is, there is nothing to be gained by waiting. This guy is just getting more converts day over day. He's telling a clear and compelling story. And frankly, he's dangerous, right? And I think that if they wait on this, I don't know what the plan is. And I mean, listen, like we've all done Oppo work and I think that they're probably thinking that we're going to wait until September when people are paying attention, but that is too late. That is too late. And so for me right now, they've got these two things. They've got the positive policy proposals that solidify the support of the New Democrats that they could be taken off the shelf right now and getting done. It's going to help people. It's going to protect them through the next session. And it's going to give them the look of a little bit of energy. And they could be spending the summer hitting on Polyev. But they'd have to find the primary.
Okay, Scott, wait a second. Well, you go.
Well, I want to say one quick thing on this. I think it's your fault, Jordan. To Chantel's point, I think it's all your fault because fundamentally what we're saying is on inflation, on Polyev, on a national agenda, more urgency, more action and more urgency. And, I just think the government, there's only one conclusion. They think they have time. So it's your fault. You struck this deal with the Liberals and you coaxed them into believing they have time. And, they have time for the next election. I think you should listen more carefully
to Jagmeet. Like, he's not playing, right?
I'm being facetious, obviously, but...
Yeah,
we don't know what happens in those private late-night conversations between Jagmeet and Justin where this deal all came together and presumably where it's still cemented. That bromance, we don't have any visibility into that thing.
It's unbelievable. Hey.
I think we got to look carefully about what's in this for New Democrats, right? And I think it's really, personally, I think it's really smart from a deeply unbiased perspective. But listen, the fact that it's not a formal coalition and they're not sharing ministerial positions, this is actually very good for New Democrats because basically the reward is high. If they're able to get through the agenda, they can point to some concrete wins. They can point to almost a governing record, right? But if the Liberals don't deliver, the cost of pulling the support is not huge. So it's, as far as New Democrats are concerned, it stacks high on the upside risk. And it's on the Liberals whether they want to take this opportunity or not. And I think Jagmeet is there. He's working openly. Like, it's been a good, positive, everything I'm hearing is that communication has been good and so on. But what's missing is that energy.
Well, but
the most important thing about that agreement is that a huge advantage goes to the party who figures out the best time and issue to break it. So both parties are constantly examining that circumstances around that agreement. 2025 is a meaningless number. That agreement is subject to review at all times, in my view. Now, Scott, I wanted to just pick up on something Jordan was saying about, say, dental care. So I have polling that indicates that basically people right now, inflation, number one issue by 18 miles, cost of living, and people are supportive of anything government might do to alleviate that pressure. So ideas like dental care and pharmacare have strong support levels right now. But even more supported are tax cuts. So would you be comfortable as a Liberal going into a campaign against Polyev with a programmatic solution to inflation versus his tax cut solution to inflation?
No, I sure wouldn't. and this is exactly what I was going to say. I mean, I won't dispute Jordan on the substance of, and that those things will contribute, but it's a little bit like Freeland's argument. These things that we've done already will have a flow through programmatic benefit that will in some ways find their way into your bank account. But, the problem that you run up against, and the reason that people pick tax cuts isn't inherently ideological. They pick tax cuts because they think, well, that will be real, right? I will pay less. Whereas if it's a promised social benefit, such as dental care, it requires a bunch of things to happen in a certain order, and maybe I'll ever see a benefit, or maybe I won't. But they're skeptical about it because it has to be delivered by government, and they've come to believe the government can't piss in a straight line. And frankly, they're pretty right about that when you look at the airports and the passport offices these days. So I just think you end up in a situation where if you permit that dynamic, the things we've given you already, the programmatic solutions, and maybe some other programmatic solutions that we'll be forced into versus tax cuts or relief on gas tax holiday, like that's gonna be a slaughter. That is just going to be walking into a right cross.
I just want to be clear that we're suggesting that 23 years of commitment to childcare without follow through might have contributed to voter cynicism about programming.
All right, let's not get into Jack Layton in 2005 because that's going to condemn our friendship before it's begun.
I believe that Jordan quite knowingly ventured into that territory.
But this programmatic thing is a real issue. I mean, it's a real problem, and this government's impulse will be to go programmatic because it will think that will allow it to mitigate some of the risks around abandoning climate and mitigate some of the political risks of jeopardizing the CNS agreement with the NDP. And I think they will just be absolutely sending a fruitcake to Pierre Poilievre and saying, "Here, please enjoy."
I'm less cynical than Scott. I think time is of the essence. I think that they have a window in which they can still accomplish these things. I think that just because past Liberal governments haven't got it done doesn't mean that it can't be done. We've seen that governments can move with alacrity when it comes to things like CERB. I think that is now an expectation from Canadians, that when a real crisis hits, the government assistance will be there. And luckily, for the Liberals, there is potentially, I think, some belief that government can still step in and be a solution here. So they have a window where they can do that. They've got a blueprint, which is the agreement. They just need to actually act on it.
All right. You know what? Vigorous conversation. I loved it. What are our hey yous? Gordon Pinsent, bring us our hey yous.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The hey yous are about to begin.
All right, Scott, you want to start? Give Jordan a moment. Sure. I'll just go right back to it. My hey you is to the Prime Minister. This falls on you now. All right. We're going to have to treat Freeland's speech last week as a mulligan, and you're going to have to step up to the tee box and drive it down the middle. And I really believe that starts with two words: gas tax. You're going to have to take relieving measures. You're going to have to take the political risk and the discomfort on your policy agenda to deal with it. It starts with that. It shouldn't end with that. There should be other things that are smart and politically smart that accompany it so that it is an integrated plan and perhaps it mitigates some of your political risk. But if you don't move on this fast, it will move on you, and lots of other things will move on you. And I just think, that last week's speech was a moment that needed to be landed, and it was not landed. It was crashed. And Prime Minister, you're the only person ahead on the dais for Freeland, and it falls to you now. You got to fix your government.
Excellent. Jordan?
My hey yous to the team around the Prime Minister, and specifically to my friend Tyler Meredith. I know you're listening. You gotta act on the agreement. You have the solutions right there. You've got some good proposals that come from the NDP that are going to help real people. They're going to be a bulwark against Pierre Poilievre's populism. Do not sleep on this. Get going right now. You're going to need that protection in the fall. Canadians need that help. Let's get this done.
All right. I was scooped by Scott. My hey you goes out to the government. I mean, inflation kills governments. Period. Flat out. New, old, doesn't matter. And the biggest risk in it is, well, there's the substantive risk that people are actually financially hurting and they want to take that out on somebody or vote for somebody that might improve it. The second thing is these things are goddamn litmus tests about your connection to people. And in a battleground of elites versus populists, the elites can't look so fucking elite. And we got and the government has to show that it really gets this. And that's going to involve doing something, whether you think that's smart economics or not. Anyway, I'd like to thank Jordan Leichnitz for joining us today, bringing her quite brilliant perspective, I think, to the show. Thank you very much. Thank you, Scott, for being here again today. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail, and obviously all of you accursed for listening. We'll be back next week with more Cursed Politics. See you then.